everyone, I'm Lindsay and I'm standing here with Ian Hazzikostas, and he is the lead encounter designer. Tell us more about your job, please.
Okay, so I'm the lead encounter designer in World of Warcraft. I run the team that makes primarily the instanced content, the raid and dungeon content for the game. We also help out somewhat with major scenario bosses, outdoor quest bosses. You can kind of think of the team as sort of specialists in multiplayer PVE combat.
Got it. And are you happy with how the PVE turned out?
Incredibly happy. I think we've managed to deliver on really more endgame content, particularly in the PvE side, than ever before in any of our prior expansions. We have 18 raid bosses waiting for players when they get right into Mists of Pandaria, 16 in instances, and 2 outdoor world bosses. 9 instances, a new challenge mode feature. There's really no end to the raid and dungeon content.
Do you have a favorite encounter?
It's like asking me to pick a favorite child. It's tough. One encounter that I will say is really cool that I'm looking forward to players seeing in the Mogu'shan Vaults raid, which opens up next week, is the Spirit Kings encounter. That is an encounter where there are 4 ancient Mogu kings. The Mogu'shan Vaults is sort of the repository of ancient Mogu history and secrets. They're a race that ruled over the continent of Pandaria thousands of years ago before their empire just kind of vanished and crumbled mysteriously. But their greatest secrets and their mysteries have been locked away in this vault. And as players are exploring it, they sort of trigger a trap or unlock something that reanimates the spirits of 4 of the great Mogu warlords from the past. The mechanics of the encounter are very reminiscent of the Omnitron Defense Council encounter in Blackwing Descent, where the bosses come out in a different order, each one of them poses different threats, as well as some very cool visuals. It's just a very dynamic experience that will change every time you pull the boss, every time you play the encounter, and I think players are going to have a really great time with it.
What's next for your team?
Other than fixing bugs, though there won't be any in the content once players actually get to see it, so moving right along. No, we will always working on the next thing. We're going to keep making more raids, more dungeons, so we're hard at work on whatever comes next, and players will have to see what that is.
Is there anything, can you give us an example of something that didn't make it out in the expansion?
For the most part, we got the main things that we wanted to get out there. Like I said, there's really more endgame content than ever before. There were, a couple of scenarios. For example, the players who are in the beta might have seen their names, might have seen the names of maps that we're still working on that will be released in a future patch, things like that. But the core raid and dungeon content that we wanted is all there.
So scenario seems to be aimed at more casual play. Will we see more challenging scenarios that really pushes the players?
Potentially. I think one of the main features of the scenario system is just how accessible it is. It's a short, roughly 15-minute experience, and because there are no specific role requirements, the queues are very quick. You can hop on in your lunch break, for example, hop in the game, queue for scenario, you're in the scenario, playing the game right away, which is, I think, a very cool thing. And as a primarily queue-focused experience, those scenarios aren't necessarily the best place to really push the envelope on challenging content. Now, that's not to say that we might not explore that space in the future in terms of 3-player or smaller group content that doesn't necessarily have traditional tank heal DPS roles, but is hard. One lesson that we've learned from Cataclysm is that challenging PvE content and random matchmaking queues don't really go very well together. One of the core experiences that we hope for players to have as game designers when we make challenging content is sort of the evolution of learning a fight. You fail initially, you make mistakes, you lose. Then you adapt, you learn from those mistakes, you apply your knowledge, then you eventually overcome and you win, you defeat the encounter. You feel good about that, you celebrate, but then you come back next time and you get to apply your knowledge and you get to exhibit mastery of the encounter. And that's really what feels good. That's kind of what reinforces the whole learning mechanism of approaching the encounter and mastering it. Well, that kind of breaks down when you're playing with random match-made groups and you might have learned the mechanics, but that's no guarantee that the 4 people you're playing with or the 2 people you're playing with next time you're there have done the same. So your own personal knowledge ends up not really mattering when it comes to success or failure, and that can lead to frustration. So we heard a lot of feedback from our players about the release dungeons in Cataclysm, and we've applied that to crafting our experiences for the Mists of Pandaria heroic dungeons, which players should find much less frustrating when they just hop into LFD. On the other end of the spectrum, though, we have a challenge mode difficulty, an all-new difficulty, to make sure that our hardcore guilds, groups of friends that want to play together, maybe on voice chat, really like the communication coordination that was required in the Cataclysm Launch heroics, have that gameplay experience available to them.
The legendary questline itemization seems to work differently in Mists of Pandaria, and with entire raids getting a legendary gem update. Did raid design influence this design and make balancing easier, and how do you make sure it doesn't happen?
Well, the legendary quest, the legendary experience throughout Mists of Pandaria, really what players are seeing in 5.0 is this just the tip of the iceberg. as players may have seen hinted at in the achievement pane, there are future steps to this quest line in patch 5.1, 5.2, and so forth. So the Legendary Gem is just the first step. That is something that players can work on in parallel. It's not something where the guild leader or the raid leader has to decide, okay, who gets the first, who gets the second. Anyone who works on the personal parts of the quest and then does the raid portions can get their orange gem, which they can put in shot-touched weapons that are available in looking for raid, normal, and heroic modes. Of course, the stronger the weapon that you get, the stronger the combined effect of the weapon and the gem is going to be. So even though you can get the gem in looking for raid mode, the heroic raider who has a heroic shot-touched weapon is going to have a much more powerful weapon in the end. As far as raid balance goes, I mean, it's certainly helpful. One thing that we found, particularly looking at how Dragon Wrath played out and the transition of Dragon Wrath into Dragon Soul, is that our traditional model of what a legendary item meant in terms of its power level wasn't really compatible with a model in which the legendary is something that pretty much at least one person, if not more, in every single raid group was guaranteed to have. It was different in Burning Crusade, for example, where we could say, okay, if you have Illidan's Warglaves, you win. You win the game, right? You're going to top damage meters, you're going to do 20% more damage than anyone who doesn't, but that's okay because you're just kind of the one guy and you got really lucky, and that's your reward for being really lucky. It's a very different dynamic when a guild can, say, have 8, 9, 10, 12 Dragon Wraths from having farmed them up, and suddenly it actually affects not just raid balance, but class balance. One of the big challenges going into Dragon Soul was the question of, well, particularly for high-end raiding, where most of their casters had farmed Dragon Wraths, how do we handle melee versus ranged balance? You know, the mage, if you have a grade where every caster has a Dragon Wrath, is the melee balanced against the caster with Dragon Wrath? In which case, the caster without Dragon Wrath is just the queues are burdened and falls behind. Or is the melee balanced against the caster without, in which case high-end guilds who have casters who all have the weapon won't bring melee. That's just not a great place to be. So I think we're still kind of evolving how our legendary weapon distribution methods and how that's going to work. You know, so one thing that we felt was really successful about the Cataclysm Legendary experience were the custom quest lines that we offered for people who did the Dragonwrath quest line, who did the Daggers quest line on the Rogue side in Dragon Soul. That was some really, really cool gameplay. I think that was evocative of what players liked most about the Priest and Hunter epics all the way back in vanilla. So that's the kind of thing I think we can expect to see continued.
So now that the first phase of Legendary Questline is raid-wide, does it mean that every player will get a legendary weapon?
Not necessarily. I think the future steps of the legendary chain have yet to be announced, and that's something players will see as we get there.
And can you give us a little more information about the Proving Grounds game mode and when we can see it?
Yeah, so that I mean, if you're talking about things that we hoped to originally make 5.0 that didn't, that's one shining example. The Proving Grounds feature, which we discussed initially at BlizzCon a little bit, was basically a single-player scenario that would serve dual purpose. It would be a chance for players to both learn and to apply the basic skills of tanking, healing, or doing damage. So a Proving Grounds for a tank might be that there's an NPC healer that you have to protect from a stream of mobs that are coming in, and there are different challenges that those mobs pose, whether the spells they cast, the ways in which they move, and so forth. So you have to hold aggro, you have to move around a lot, and control the playing field, and do all the things that a skilled tank would have to do in a fast-moving dungeon group. And the longer you survive, the longer you let your NPC survive, the better your score would be. So the way this would work, at the very high end, it would give the players who are competitive a way to say, because we hopefully would have leaderboards accompanying it, the ability to say, literally, I am the best tank on the server. Like, look, go to this website, it says I'm the best tank on the server. If you want to argue with me, well, go try to beat my time, then we can talk. On the other end of the spectrum, it would give players who aren't necessarily as experienced with tanking a chance to learn those skills in a safer environment. World of Warcraft, for the most part, from level 1 through max level, is a DPS-oriented game. Your quests, you generally complete them by killing things. Even if you're a tank spec, even if you're a healer spec, you are defeating creatures, looting them, getting the things they protect, and so forth. And if you don't do instance runs on the way up as you're leveling, you may reach max level without necessarily that experience in applying those skills. And there's no real way to practice how to tank right now, other than it probably coming at the expense of 4 other people's experiences. You're kind of stumbling through learning how threat works, learning how these buttons work, and how the different dynamics of group gameplay work, while other people are getting frustrated. And that's part of what we think leads in many cases to the long queues as we're waiting for more tanks to tank our instances, for example, because it can be a very pressure-filled experience, and not a lot of people like being in the spotlight in that sense. But if they had a chance to practice those skills, to practice the gameplay involved before they go in, they might feel much more comfortable doing it.
Can we expect any kind of unique armor sets or rewards for the challenge mode?
For the challenge mode, certainly. So I think the centerpiece of our challenge mode reward structure for the very, very best players, this is kind of the equivalent to getting Gladiator in PvP in terms of how attainable we expect it to be. It's really going to be a challenge that's out there, and because players' gear scales down for challenge modes, it's not something you can just out-gear and say, okay, I'm going to come back a couple of patches later and I'll get my gold medals, no problem. But yes, for players who get all gold medals in every challenge mode, they will obtain a class-specific transmogrifiable set of armor. And this armor has really unique effects associated with it. Aside from looking really over the top and epic, and you'll clearly stand out standing around Stormwind or Orgrimmar with this armor on, it also has built-in animations, such as, for example, the Shaman armor has giant totem poles on the shoulders, and when you cast spells, sort of fire will well up within them. But even if you /laugh, if you do a laugh emote, when you laugh, the heads on the totems will actually laugh along with your character. Basically, every set has a few built-in hooks like that for players to discover. So it's something that players I think are going to really take pride in and show off. And everyone who sees someone wearing that armor set is first going to say, "Wow, where can I get that?" And second, "Wow, you must be really good at the game to have earned it."
So, is there any chance that you'll bring back a shorter, funner raids like Zulamon in following patches?
I think it basically fits the storytelling we're trying to do. In the 4.1 patch, we were really trying to focus on the evolution of the Zandalari trolls and what was happening there, and so it made sense to bring back those old raids. And obviously, we don't just bring them back; we update them very heavily. The same way, a player who does Zul'Gurub today, it's almost unrecognizable compared to the Zul'Gurub that people might have done as a 20-player raid years ago. The same way, if you go into Deadmines or you go into Scholomance or Scarlet Monastery, they're very, very different zones with different bosses and different mechanics. So it's, players definitely enjoy that, and we enjoy revisiting some of our classic dungeons, classic settings, but it's sort of a case-by-case basis that depends on the story we're trying to tell in a given patch.
What are the most challenging raid encounters and dungeons in this expansion, according to you, and why?
So most difficult overall, I think all of the challenge modes as far as dungeons go are tuned to be quite demanding. I think just finishing them is going to be an accomplishment for many players, and the way the medals are tuned, even just getting a bronze medal in a challenge mode is both a challenge and an accomplishment. Players who get all bronze medals can earn a title that is unique to show off their accomplishment. In particular, I'd have to say probably Shadowpen Monastery is going to be a really tough one for players to go into. That is the enclave of the Shadowpen monks, who are an order of Pandaren who are dedicated to sort of protecting the continent of Pandaria with ancient traditions. And the overall feel of that dungeon is very much inspired by some of the cooler moments that we enjoyed in movies like Kill Bill. It's a very Hollywood martial artsy feel to it. Very cool place overall, but very, very hard on challenge mode. On the raid front, as keeping with our traditions, I think the hardest boss is probably going to be the Heroic Shafir. Heroic mode of our very final boss of this patch. Odds are good that will be hard, and that was not tested at all. The Heroic mode was not tested at all in our beta servers. It has surprises that players will have to discover for themselves. There's a whole extra phase awaiting players that's not present in normal mode, kind of like Shades of Heroic Ragnaros. So players will have a fun time with that one.
A blacklisting feature was added for PvP to remove 2 battlegrounds from our random battleground queue. Do you plan to add a similar feature for random dungeon systems?
We don't have any specific plans along those lines in the future. It may be something we'd consider. We obviously look at the dungeons that our players are running the most and the feedback that players are giving in our dungeons. I think the first thing we'd rather do is just improve the experience. If we're consistently hearing the players groan every time a specific loading screen pops up when they push the queue for random dungeon button, we'd rather figure out what's wrong there and improve it and fix it. With Battlegrounds, I think it's a little bit different because our Battlegrounds don't even really purport to offer the same experience as each other. Some involve vehicles, some don't. Some are small, some are large. It's really hard to compare Battle for Gilneas with Alterac Valley. And you're not necessarily looking for each of those types of experiences when you queue up, so players can decide, okay, I really don't feel like playing a large-scale BG today. I'm going to blacklist Alterac Valley and Isle of Conquest. Or I really want to play a large-scale BG. I don't like CTF BAPs. I'll blacklist Warsong Gulch and Twin Peaks. Whereas with our dungeons, for the most part, we try to offer a relatively consistent experience in terms of the overall feel and flow of the PvE gameplay.
All right. I think that's everything I have. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, just that, really excited to see all these fans come out tonight to celebrate our launch, and even more excited to see everybody get on and dive right into the game over the next week or so. It's been a labor of love for us for the past year and a half, 2 years, and really one of the most gratifying moments for designers, for anyone in a creative line of work, is seeing people get to enjoy what you've produced. And this is just amazing for us, and can't wait to see people play the game, and can't wait to get home myself and start leveling.
Yay! Thank you so much for spending time with us. I know
My
it's like
pleasure.
a kind of a crazy night for you guys, but congratulations. Oh my gosh.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ian. Appreciate your time. All right, thank you.